Hello, everybody, and welcome once again to the Only You here in studio, and Dr. Pino in his office as usual, or I should say, getting back to normal since I've been out of the home office, and you have been away for a while because you've been ill, correct?
Correct. I just got back into the office yesterday after being in quarantine for COVID. Tested positive, had to go to the basic illness and isolation and all of that. Fortunately, it was not anything serious, and I think in part because of the fact that I have vaccines, I have one booster. So everything you read is true. You get a real bad sore throat when you're vaccinated. You get a lot of runny nose, watery eyes. And as you and I were talking about before, it's important to understand that um, right now, especially here in Arizona, we're going to allergy season.
Hmm.
And if you don't have a fever and you don't have your oxygen levels going down, when you start with this, you say, well, my allergies are coming back, right? And you cannot be fooled by that. You have to be doing your testing if you have testing at home. I started testing on Saturday last week, no, Sunday last week, and I tested negative because I had a sore throat. And I tested again Monday morning, was negative. And I continue feeling worse and worse. So Monday afternoon, I test again, and I have PCR equipment for test, not just the regular one. And it bingo comes back positive, right? So we had to be persistent because we have some responsibility, right? So the moment I know I'm positive, I have to call the hospital. I'm not able to go there. We need to make arrangements. Office, all my patients need to be canceled because I'm not going to be exposing them, right? So you have to spend your 7 days out of the environment. And of course, my wife and I, we don't have children at home. My wife gets sick too, right? So we had to spend the unnatural process of being together 24/7 in isolation, which is it was a lot of fun actually. We actually enjoyed it, but my wife is not very patient, so the isolation was more difficult for her than it is for me.
But still some good bonding time.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
But to the point of really the title of today's show, you know, you did the right thing. I know when I got it, I did the right thing as much as I could. However, there's quite a few people out there who don't think that what we did is appropriate. They still don't think it's real. They think capitulating to it, whether it's masking, vaccinating, or social distancing, or even just paying attention to it all, is basically something that challenges their manhood.
Yes, and it's complex. It's complicated because there are. You remember over the last few weeks, we've been talking about a lot about men. We talked about masculinity. We even talked about toxic masculinity. In the toxic masculinity realm, in that small universe, which is not most men, but in that group, anything that comes from the outside that makes you feel that you're not alpha and that you are supposed to be the protective lead, right, of the tribe, and that anything short of that makes you not a man, right? That's when things get a little delusional, when you say it's not real. So when you say it's not real, means that that person is getting a little bit outside of the reality as a way of managing their fears, okay, and their toxic masculinity because they
So,
don't want to be castrated,
so,
basically.
so is that just a form of avoidance then?
It's a form of resistance
Okay.
that turns into aggression because basically they cannot be convinced. And we've seen a lot of that over the last couple of years, in terms of people getting entrenched into the bubble of delusion. They're saying this is not existent. This is a plot from the government. This is the Chinese trying to control us, right? That, I mean, even though a lot of people believe that, if you look at it individually, that is delusional. It has to be managed as such. You don't manage delusions by challenging them. You manage delusions by extending a hand and helping the person feel a little degree of trust so you can have an opening to try to help them be less afraid, right? The same thing happens with vaccines.
So for those men who are not on that extreme, now that COVID seems to, I mean, we live in Arizona, and for the most part, unless you read the numbers, which are going up, people just don't seem to take it very seriously anymore. They're not really worried about it. And then when they do catch it, a lot of people are ignoring all the safety factors of social distancing, masking, and quarantining. Um, is this also part of that kind of toxic masculinity?
Not necessarily, because then you have different degrees of fear, right? Different degrees of resistance. And outside of toxic masculinity, it gets a little more complicated because you have to look at it in context, right? It's not that people um, don't have the ability to rationalize properly, but there is some more resistance. And the resistance is complicated because you bring other factors. You know, when you get into toxic masculinity, even though it's so intense, it's a lot more raw and easier to define. When you get in the population in general, you get into different subgroups. For example, a lot of men have had their masculinity questioned during COVID, right? How? Well, you had to stay at home all the time. You had to share duties that you were not sharing before. You
Mm,
kind of being pushed into a not necessarily protective but assisting role, right? Because we feel that we are all hunters, you know, and gatherers, and we leave the tribe behind. We go and earn our keep, and then we bring it to the home, and we are, you know, top notch alpha male. Most men have some of that. You have COVID and you're not able to go to work, right? You're not able to interact with your social support environment that perpetuates your sense of masculinity, right?
mm.
So now you're at home, and not only you're at home, the kids are at home, all of them, right? And the wife is at home. So whatever activities you got yourself involved in the past that made you feel that you had some sense of control of your masculinity is being challenged, right? And of course, that's going to create resistance. And that resistance can come in a lot of different ways. For example, it may come in the way of people on the outside are trying to control me, right? So people um, want to get me vaccinated. So
Mm,
instead of expressing my resistance at home with my wife and kids, I can divert, right? So you start projecting into other places your resistance because you need a place where you can be a man. I mean, and I'm saying that not in a good way, right? That you can express your masculinity. I mean, you work in a place too where you go and see a lot of men that tend to be very masculine, right? And they project their masculinity by the use of firearms. Okay. So it's a lot easier for them to project it that way than to say to their wives, honey, I'm not cooking today.
mm.
Right. So it gets a little more complicated. So the pandemic itself has been a challenge for men in a lot of different ways. And I'm not saying that it's not a challenge for women either. But right now we're specifically talking about men. And men needs to understand that dynamic so they can do something about it.
So really, if you look at it as something that take away their role, how do they gain it back? Or how should they? Let's when we take a step back, if they're losing their role, how do they at least adjust to the current situation, and then moving forward, how would they get it back in a healthier manner than the toxicity that we've been spoken of before?
Well, the toxic masculine really needs intervention. You know that person needs restraint in terms of not uh, abusing their physical power, not abusing their violence, right? Not demeaning other people, not trying to punch people below the belt emotionally so they can soften them up. In general, men, I think most men have adjusted relatively okay. And I think that what you're seeing, we started the conversation by talking about people not taking this seriously. That is a way of men to regain some of their sense of masculinity, right?
That's no big deal. Walk it off, shake it off. I don't have to worry about that. All that kind of stuff.
Exactly. And again, I'm not opposed to that. I mean, and I have to tell you, I have colleagues and physicians that I've had this conversation with, and they have told me exactly the same thing.
Mm,
What's the big deal? We're all going to get it, right? You do what you can. However, we physicians have kind of an obligation or responsibility because we see so many people. So the issue of vaccines is not ever questioned, right? So I mean, I have physicians that tell me, okay, fine, I got my two vaccines, I got my booster, you know, God bless me, and I'm going on with my life, right? The problem is, and we're seeing it right now with this new um, variant of the virus, is that we still have a very large population of people unvaccinated,
mm.
right? And even though this variant, it is more infectious but less lethal, right?
Correct. Yeah, hospitalizations are down, but still people are getting sick and it's affecting their behavior, their workplace, their families.
Exactly. And not only that, but those unvaccinated, they're still at a higher risk of hospitalization and death, which reminds us purpose, right? What is the purpose of us having um, a
A
vaccine? And
vaccine.
is the vaccine is basically to protect you from hospitalization and death, right?
Not
But
not it's not about eradicating the disease. I know there's a lot of misinformation or misunderstanding. Everyone thinks, "Oh, you have this and it just goes away." It's really not about that.
yeah, and when I got sick, I had my family doctor, right? Dr. Ortiz, my family doctor. I've been seeing him for a while. And of course, I'm a physician, so I know everything, right? So why would I call my doctor, right? I mean, it's just like, so I had to get humble, right? And I had to get in line and send a message to Dr. Ortiz. And it says, Zach, tested positive for um, the um, the COVID-19 virus. Here are my vitals. My oxygen levels are at 98. My pulse is 75. I'm fine. I don't have a fever, right? But I had to present myself as needing someone, right?
Mm,
And that is something that we men have a lot of difficulty with. Just the idea of needing someone is almost automatically rejected, right? And I think that we've talked about this before. We need to reshape the concept of masculinity along the lines of somebody who's less aggressive and less in control. So
mm,
for men in general, we all have to learn that it's okay to not be in control. Nothing happens. Try it, right? I mean, try telling your significant other or your partner, I feel sad today. Find out what happens. Nothing happens. Tell your significant other, sometimes I feel scared. I'm afraid of the virus, right? And I don't know what to do about it. Nothing happens, right? But those are the risks that we men have a lot of difficulty with. Because when I send a message to Dr. Ortiz, who's my physician, I'm not really saying I got COVID. I'm saying I need you there.
mm,
I need to know that you are there. And he replied to me and he said, Hey, Laurel, if you need anything, just let me know. We have some new medications now. If you're still getting sick, let me know. We'll send you the medications. So that in itself is very self soothing, right? But I had to take the risk of presenting myself vulnerable. And we men have a lot of trouble with that. So it becomes extremely important that we take the risk, right? That we extend the hand. I mean, it's a lot easier to get in the car, cut in front of somebody, and flip your finger, right? That's
mm.
easy.
and and sometimes satisfying, but sometimes not. Yeah, I understand what your point. It's kind of interesting to see it in that light. I think most people don't understand it that way. Um, that men are trying really through some of their aggressive behaviors to just recapture their masculinity. Um,
and avoid
why
their and avoid their fears.
and avoid their fears. And it's having again. worked with some very special people in the military, it was very interesting that most of them, especially at the highest levels, the tiered units, they're very open about fears and about what's going on. My one buddy in particular says, "Oh, I'm terrified of jumping out of airplanes." I said, "Really? How many jumps do you have?" He goes, "Oh, 2,000." But he's honest about being terrified. He goes, "Yeah, and everyone gives me, everyone teases me on the plane, but that's okay. It's okay to be that way. It's okay to show vulnerability because when you're in a team, doing very risky things, if you're not open about it, you become the liability. Instead of like saying, "Look, I have an issue right now," and managing it, and that was they told me, said you want to deal with it when it's an issue before it becomes an emergency and before it becomes a crisis. Because if you don't deal with it when it's a small issue, it's just going to accelerate. So for men right now, what are their options? Getting another booster, just living their life. What would you give as advice to some of the men who are still on the edge about this?
Well, what I would say is that um, you getting a vaccine for this virus is no different than getting a vaccine for the cold, or is no different you getting a vaccine for measles, or for tetanus, or whatever vaccine you're gonna get. It's not panacea. It's not gonna keep you from getting sick, right? But you cannot take the fact of getting a vaccine into the realm of masculinity or fear, right? Because we're very good at rejecting things that make us feel uncomfortable,
Mm.
right? So I don't think that we've done a very good job on recruiting people to get the vaccine, right? We either hear the message that we heard initially is that if you don't get the vaccine, you're being irresponsible, right?
You try to
Uh,
guilt people into getting it.
exactly. Or if you get the vaccine, you're weak. You're following the crowd. Blah blah blah.
Yeah, you're a
And
sheep.
exactly. And the problem is that vaccines in general are an issue between a patient and a doctor. Yes, they're public health issues. But unfortunately, because of the anxiety and political winds around the issue of COVID 19, most of the dealing with people getting vaccine was massive, right? And we lost an opportunity of saying this is a conversation that needs to happen between the patient and the family doctor, the family and the pediatrician, right? Because that in that conversation, the person is getting informed consent of the risks and benefits. That's very different than seeing an ad on TV or see Dr. Fauci on TV saying, "Oh, this is safe."
Mm.
You know, so the you see, physicians continue to have a position of authority and trust with the people they treat, right? We as physicians have to be able to accept that some people would not get vaccinated. And I have to tell you, I was very disappointed when I heard people in some practices in the United States that said, if you're not vaccinated, I won't see you.
Mm.
I think that's unethical and I think that's unprofessional. Okay, because it is our job to walk the patient to the process of getting a vaccine or not getting a vaccine. But if we negate the opportunity for us to do our job because we're afraid, okay, we're losing our professionalism. So it becomes, I mean, I got COVID, but I didn't get it for more than 2 years, right?
Mm.
But I was having people coming to my office, vaccinated, not vaccinated. They will have the conversation with me. They will tell me why not. I explain the risks and benefits, and it's their decision, not mine. Somebody getting a vaccine is their decision. My only caveat is, well, if you're going to do it together with your physician, right?
Mm.
Now, what's the problem for men with that? Most men don't go to the doctor,
They don't.
right? So I think that there's a double opportunity here because I think that most men need to go to the doctor, especially if you're over 40. Let me just give you one statistic. 1 in 7 men over 40 are going to get prostate cancer. 1 in 7. Okay. When was the last time most men had a prostate exam, right? Or at least a blood test looking for some parameters of prostate cancer? Most people don't go to the doctor, right?
And then they wait for it to become again an emergency or a crisis before they do anything about
Exactly. So we're very good to patch things up, but we're not very good at prevention. And I think that we need to encourage men that it's masculine to see your doctor, right? You know why? Because you're going to live longer.
it. Yeah.
I mean, we talked about this before. Longevity in men in all societies, not just the Anglo Saxon American society, in all societies all over the world, is shorter than the life expectancy of women. Now, we always say that women tend to get sick more often than men. It's not that they get sick more often, it's that they get diagnosed more
Diagnosed
often
more often.
because they go to the doctor, right? So, men's statistics are kind of complicated because the universe is not as large as it should be, and we're not identifying things in men that we should be identifying that may turn into longevity, right?
Hmm. So concerning vaccinations, now we have this new booster. What's your take on that? What would you tell the men out there listening?
Wow. Well, let's hope that they get vaccinated first, first and second
First and
dose.
foremost.
And I did get a booster, the first booster. I have, and I researched this, and I'm looking into new data on this. And there's a big dilemma right now, I think. And I'm not an expert on vaccines, I'm not an expert in immunology, but what I understand as a physician is that most of the data that is suggesting the second booster is based on antibodies, right? What is the measurement of antibodies that has been shown to be effective? And the antibodies actually go up significantly for the first 6 to 8 weeks, and then they come back down. But antibodies are only one response to the vaccine, right? We have very complicated, deep seated immunological systems like T cells that identify pathogens and they initiate the antibody response again. The problem is that, as far as I know, there hasn't been a lot of long term studies on T cells because T cells will really tell us if the um, protection we're going to get on COVID is going to be like the measles. You get a measles vaccines, but you never get it again,
Hmm.
right? Or is it going to be more like the cold, right? That we're going to have to get a vaccine every year. But that data is non-existent, right? So what I tell men is that I think that you should get at least vaccinated your first and second vaccine, maybe a booster. That's going to be a choice. But um, I don't believe, as a physician and as a researcher, and most of my research is in psychiatry, um, that we're going to kind of boost our way out of this pandemic, right? I don't think that the answer is going to be getting boosters every 2 months or every 3 months. I think that we need to seriously consider more research, look at the immunological. And I have to tell you, part of the problem, for what I've heard from some immunologists and hematologists, that T cells are very difficult to study, right?
Hmm.
Because of some technical issues. So I think that they're developing newer methods for that may facilitate things going better. But at this point, I think that everybody should get their vaccines. Let's start with that. I think that the boosting thing has become a distraction from the original purpose, which is let's get everybody vaccinated. I mean, if we can get up to 85%, be fine.
And when you mention the goal of most men to be the protector, again, it's kind of counterintuitive. Oh, I have to go take this vaccine; it makes me weak. Whoa, whoa, whoa! If you're playing your true role as protector of your family, your society, first thing you should do is be getting that vaccine, get yourself sorted out, so you can be there for those people
Yes,
and be an example.
yeah, but that is conflicting with our reptilian self, right? We're animal drive, that we are the killer. There's no other killer but us, right? We're the hunter. We don't
Mm,
like to be hunted. So there is a dilemma, between I have to protect the people around me. And the problem is that most of the time it gets manifested as in the dilemma of protection versus violence, right? So we're very good at protecting being aggressive and violent. We're not very good at protecting by being smart.
mm.
And I think that that's something that needs to change somewhat.
Well, this would be an opportunity for a lot of men out there. Another thing that's come up, and we have discussed this offline a bit, is the impending mental health crisis that has come out of COVID-19. How is that specifically geared toward men?
It's a major issue. It is a major issue for me because I deal with this every day, right? I work I manage adolescent psychiatric services in a hospital, so I see all the violence and self-directed violence associated with adolescent men. Now, part of the problem with adolescent men, adolescent children, if you may, right, is that adolescence per se is the prototypical image of toxic masculinity.
Hmm.
Right? So, so if you want to, if you want to, if you want to make a caricature of toxic masculinity, think of a teenager. Right? That is toxic masculinity. Not acceptable when you are past 25, right? But we see a lot of this toxic masculinity from age 13, 14 until about age 25. Go to any college and probably half of the boys are being toxic, right? And I'm the top of the world. I control everything. I have all the girls. Blah 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 blah. Okay, fine. But the reality is that when it comes to adolescence in particular, and with older men that are toxic, is that you run out of options into how to express your masculinity. And when you're in the midst of COVID, there's not a lot of opportunity to be the macho person, right? Because the environment doesn't allow you to. You're not allowed to be outside. You're with your family, your kids, and sooner or later you're going to explode. And you can explode internally, you can explode externally. I see it with kids all the time. So how does that translate with kids? Translates into violence at home, substance abuse, suicidal behavior, in some cases psychosis, right? So I have to deal with that every day. But we see the same situation with adults because we treat adults in the hospital too. So the circumstances of not having the freedom of expressing their dysfunctional masculinity creates a time bomb, right?
Hmm.
So we start seeing in the adult population issues of domestic violence, worsening of alcoholism and drug abuse, depression with suicidal ideation, violence toward others, and murder, right? I mean, a lot of these things are happening, and it really requires that um, we really take a step back and say, how do we go about this, right? Because traditionally, we have handled these things two ways. One is through health, the other one is through justice, right? And justice is really not very good at this,
Hmm.
right? They're good, very good at restraining and incarcerating, but not very good at rehabilitating. We're not, so it becomes problematic.
So it's interesting you say that. So really, this whole idea of let's get rid of toxic masculinity kind of flies in the face of the solution to allow the reality of you need to allow a certain amount of it for men to be healthy in a weird way.
Well, well, there's
As
some.
long as it's applied in a non-violent and non-destructive manner, but there has to be some place for guys to be, right? They need that. That's part of their nature.
Well, you see, I have my own opinion about sports, and I love sports, right? Organized sports, professional sports. I've always thought about sports as the compromise to avoid war, right?
Mm,
So we say, well, we're not going to kill each other, but we're going to have a team, and they're going to play for us, and we one side wins, the other one loses. Okay, it hasn't worked very well in terms of preventing wars, but at least it's been an attempt, right? So men become very masculine in those situations. I mean, you can see it when you're coach when you're coaching and the parents show up, and start showing their toxicity, and how they're treating their kids and become aggressive and all that. Now, remember, I'm not for toxic masculinity at any level, but I am for healthy masculinity. And the problem has been because of cancel culture, okay, masculinity has been under significant attack,
mm,
right? So men are almost afraid of showing any masculinity because now any masculinity is toxic, and that's not true. Okay. There's healthy masculinity, okay, that is actually biologically, psychologically, and socially based. A lot of people don't like it, right? But it is. I mean, we cannot get rid of our reptilian selves, right? We cannot get rid of our genetic, psychological, and social background. It's not going to happen overnight. So, men in general who are healthy in their masculinity need to stop being attacked by other people,
Mm.
okay, and being shamed for being men.
Sounds like a topic for another show, healthy masculinity and how to manage it. Because I think you're right. I think it's important. Anytime someone is attacked, depend no matter the situation or the subject matter, people get defensive instead of just accepting, okay, this is the way people are, and there's a biological, social reason for this existing. Let's find a healthy place to put it so that it benefits society a little better. Well, doctor, once again, I appreciate your time and hopefully you're going to be healing up enough that we could do some more shows without you.
We don't be being convalescent, so
Exactly.
we'll make it happen. Hey, it's great talking to you, man. Take care.
Have a good one. Take care.